The call came late one autumn evening, as the leaves were turning a deep crimson and gold, falling softly from the trees that lined the narrow, winding roads of the small provincial town where I spent many of my childhood summers. My grandmother, the matriarch of our family, was gravely ill. The news hit me hard memories of her stories about spirits and forgotten entities, told by the flickering light of an oil lamp flooded back. Her voice, filled with a mix of wisdom and mystery, had always fascinated and frightened me. With a heavy heart, I decided to return to the town I had left behind many years ago. As my car rolled down the familiar roads, now overgrown and more desolate than I remembered, a sense of foreboding settled over me. The trees seemed older, their twisted branches casting long shadows that danced in the fading light. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decaying leaves, a reminder of the passage of time. Upon arriving, I found my grandmother's house in a state of disrepair, as if time had stopped decades ago. The once well-tended garden was now a wild tangle of weeds and overgrown shrubs. The wooden fence was falling apart, and the paint on the house had long since peeled away, leaving the wood exposed to the elements. It was as though the house itself was mourning the decline of its last occupant. Entering the house, I was greeted by a thick layer of dust and an eerie silence that seemed to amplify every creak of the floorboards. The air was heavy with the scent of must and age. My grandmother lay in her bed, frail and motionless, her face a mere shadow of the vibrant woman I remembered. She seemed to be a ghost herself, trapped between this world and the next. Determined to make her final days comfortable, I set about cleaning the house and preparing meals, trying to bring a semblance of normalcy back to this forgotten place. Each room held memories of my childhood, filled with the echoes of laughter and the warmth of family gatherings. But now, those memories seemed distant, overshadowed by the creeping sense of unease that permeated the air. That first night, after hours of cleaning and sorting through old photographs and keepsakes, I finally retired to my childhood bedroom. The room was just as I remembered it, with its faded wallpaper and creaky bed. Exhausted, I fell into a restless sleep, only to be awakened by a soft whisper that seemed to vibrate through my very soul. In the darkness, I saw my grandmother, standing at the foot of my bed. But something was horribly wrong. Her eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and her smile was a twisted mockery of the warmth I once knew. Panic gripped me as I realized that this was not the grandmother I loved, but a sinister reflection of her. Despite my fear, I managed to rise from the bed and guide her back to her room, convinced that this was merely an episode of sleepwalking, a relic from my childhood. I tucked her back into bed, her cold, bony hands clutching at the blankets as if trying to anchor herself to this world. As I left her room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The night passed uneventfully, but the morning brought a new horror. I found that the figure lying beside me was not my grandmother but a grotesque mockery of her, a twisted amalgamation of flesh and shadow. My heart pounded as I stumbled back, realizing that the nightmare I thought I had left behind was very much real. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I decided to stay another day, hoping to uncover the truth behind the terrifying events. As the day wore on, I delved deeper into the history of the house and our family, searching for any clues that might explain the darkness that had taken hold. In the attic, I found old journals and letters, filled with accounts of strange occurrences and sightings that spanned generations. It seemed that our family had always been plagued by some unseen force, a malevolent presence that lurked in the shadows of the house. The more I read, the clearer it became that my grandmother had been fighting this darkness her entire life, trying to protect us from its grasp. As night fell once more, I braced myself for what was to come. The darkness seemed thicker, more oppressive, as if it were alive and watching me. I could feel its cold breath on the back of my neck, whispering my deepest fears into my ear. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside sent shivers down my spine. My grandmother's transformation became more pronounced, her attacks more violent. She was no longer the loving woman who had raised me, but a creature driven by an insatiable hunger for something I could not understand. The house itself seemed to come alive, its walls pulsating with a malevolent energy that threatened to consume me. One night, I awoke to find her standing over me, her eyes blazing with an unholy light. She lunged at me with a strength I didn't know she possessed, her hands clawing at my throat. I fought back, using every ounce of strength I had to break free from her grip. In a desperate bid for survival, I managed to push her away and flee the house, the sound of her enraged screams echoing in my ears. Breathing heavily, I stumbled outside into the cool night air. The darkness seemed to follow me, its tendrils reaching out to drag me back into the nightmare. I fumbled with my car keys, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Finally, the engine roared to life, and I sped away from the house, leaving behind the twisted memories and the horrors that dwelled within its walls. For days, I wandered in a daze, unable to shake the feeling that something was still watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. The nightmares continued, vivid and terrifying, replaying the events of that fateful night over and over in my mind. I could see my grandmother's face, twisted and contorted with rage, her eyes burning with an unquenchable fire. Even though I had left the house, its shadow still loomed over me, a constant reminder of the darkness that had taken root in my life. Strange occurrences began to happen wherever I went, lights flickering, objects moving on their own, whispers in the night. It was as if the house had followed me, its malevolent presence refusing to let go. Desperate for answers, I began to research the history of the house and our family in greater detail. I reached out to distant relatives, hoping to uncover any information that might help me understand what was happening. Their stories were eerily similar to my own tales of hauntings, unexplained phenomena, and encounters with the supernatural. One relative, an elderly aunt, revealed that our family had a long history of dabbling in the occult. She spoke of ancient rituals and dark pacts made by our ancestors in a desperate bid for power and protection. These actions, she believed, had cursed our family, binding us to the darkness that now haunted us. Armed with this new knowledge, I returned to the house, determined to confront the evil that had plagued my family for generations. The journey back was fraught with trepidation, but I knew it was something I had to do. As I approached the house, it seemed to pulse with a dark energy, as if anticipating my arrival. Inside, I found my grandmother's old journals, filled with notes and incantations meant to ward off the darkness. Among the pages, I discovered a ritual that promised to break the curse, but it required great sacrifice and courage. With a heavy heart, I gathered the necessary items and prepared myself for the task ahead. The ritual was long and arduous, each step filled with an overwhelming sense of dread. The air grew thick with the stench of decay, and shadows danced around me, whispering threats and promises of pain. But I pressed on, fueled by the hope that I could finally free my family from this ancient curse. As I completed the final steps of the ritual, the house began to tremble, its walls cracking and splintering under the strain. A deafening roar filled the air, and I felt a presence unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was the embodiment of pure evil, a darkness so profound that it seemed to consume all light and hope. In the center of the room, a figure began to materialize, a grotesque, shadowy form that shifted and writhed with malevolent energy. It was the source of the curse, the entity that had tormented my family for centuries. Its eyes burned with an unholy light, and its voice was a cacophony of screams and whispers. Summoning all my courage, I confronted the entity, reciting the incantations I had learned from my grandmother's journals. The air crackled with energy, and the shadows seemed to recoil in fear. The entity screamed in rage, its form growing more unstable with each word I spoke. The ritual required a sacrifice, a willing offering to break the bond between our family and the darkness. With a heavy heart, I realized what I had to do. I offered myself, pledging my life to free my family from the curse. As I spoke the final words, a searing pain shot through me, and the room was filled with blinding light. For a moment, I felt as if I were being torn apart, my very essence pulled in all directions. But then, the light began to fade, and the pain subsided. I found myself standing in the same room, but everything had changed. The shadows were gone, replaced by a sense of calm and peace. The house, once a place of terror, now felt warm and inviting. The darkness had been banished, and my sacrifice had broken the curse. I felt a profound sense of relief, knowing that my family was finally free from the torment that had plagued us for generations. My grandmother's spirit, once twisted by the darkness, was now at peace. As I left the house, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The sky was clear, and the sun shone brightly, a stark contrast to the gloom that had hung over me for so long. I knew that I had done the right thing, and that my family could now move forward without fear.